Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks host. Dang it, Brian. So what happens is in my head, I try and be like a sentence ahead. I was going to say I'm your host. So I was ready to say host. I went too soon. I jumped the gun. But anyway, welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. I'm your host, Dre Alvarez, a.k.a. Nerd Numbers. And today we've got some kind of tangential topics, but they will relate to the NBA Finals and the current state of the NBA that we want to discuss. And, you know, obviously it gets a lot easier this time of year. There's the NBA Finals and there's draft speculation. We had a really big show with Chris Ye about the draft that came out on Monday. We recorded it Friday, released it Monday. So, you know, probably not going to go too much into depth about the draft, although we might dance around it with our topics. So, as always, the show is produced by our awesome host, Brian Foster, our Word of God. You can find him on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. Say, hey, Brian.
Yeah, so you were introducing the hosts after all. You got it right.
Yeah, I always introduce the host.
Yeah.
And then for those of you that are new to the show, Brian Foster is a huge Golden State Warriors fan. And so he's been happy as heck about the current state of things in the NBA. So let's discuss a few things. The first topic I want to jump into to kind of give you a rundown, we're going to be discussing something known as the Flynn effect. We're going to be discussing the idea of the positionless basketball warriors, which is not true. And then, of course, we'll just tie in the finals as needed with those. So the Flynn effect, for those of you that don't know, is this concept. In fact, I'm assuming Brian will do the same, but I'm just going to get the Wikipedia article up in front of me.
It's up on stream right now.
Just so I quote it correctly. So I believe this started, if I'm not mistaken, there was a guy named Flynn, I believe it's James Flynn, that was looking at standardized test scores, and I think the IQ test, of course, is one of them. So this actually really relates to the NBA and what we do at the Boxscore Geeks with the Wins Produce formula, because the way the IQ test works is everybody takes the same test and average is 100. And so what's really, really key about that is that means 100 moves based on your population. And what he discovered is that essentially, let's see, I'm trying to read the official. I don't know if you're faster than me, but essentially discovered that people on average, at least according to the IQ test, were getting smarter. And notice this among other standardized tests that are normalized. Normalized meaning they adjust to average. They use, you know, if you were ever in school and were graded on the curve, lots of tests do this where, you know, they judge based on the bell curve. So essentially it's the case where if you were to get 100 on the IQ test, you know, 50 years ago, you would be in a problematic area in modern day. And so the incredible part about this is that means we are getting smarter. Every generation has been smarter than the generation before it, according to the Flynn effect. And by the way, this is very similar to something known as Moore's law in computers. That's the idea that I think, I forget the amount of time, but the number of transistors that can fit on a chip like doubles every X years. And that's
something like 10 years, but I don't remember exactly what it is.
Yeah, and basically the idea that's why computers keep getting faster and faster and faster. And so that's why, like, you know, and I mean, that's not surprising, right? When Dave Barry first hosted the Wages of Wins, if he had wanted to host it on his own server and pay for his own traffic and all this, a potential ESPN Spike Day could have cost him hundreds of dollars. Whereas nowadays, you know, you can host stuff on Amazon AWS for pennies, and I'm talking like gigabytes of data. So, and you know, obviously that's trivial too, right? When I say gigabytes, there's, you know, what, petabytes, terabytes. I'm forgetting where we're at now. That's almost just standard. So, you know, Flynn effect, a very similar thing where, by the way, this isn't like a hard, fast rule. It's not saying it's going to continue forever. Same, you know, people have been saying the same about Moore's law. Are we at peak Moore's law?
We've got an update here on Moore's law, Dre. I was way off. Originally in 1965, when he proposed it, Gordon Moore, that is, it was every year the number of circuits double, not every 10 years. This Investopedia entry is saying now it's more like 18 months, but that's still pretty impressive. Anyway, continue with that.
Now, the key part about what I would say about the Flynn effect in regards to looking at intelligence is what we know about the IQ test is it's a test that tests like what you know and what you have been taught. And so it's not necessarily saying that humans now are smarter than they used to be in the sense that brains have evolved or whatever. But what's really key, and we'll notice this, right? I'm sitting in front of a magic box that can tell me anything. If you ask me a question, Brian, despite the fact that it is my, by the way, the reverse sponsorship plug coming up in my slow ass Surface Pro, that if I have 3 pages open on Chrome or Internet Explorer, takes 3 billion years to load. I have a magic box that can teach me anything. One of my favorite Pete Holmes kind of jokes is actually called like Google and not knowing. And he has this fantastic bit about like there was a time where if you didn't know where Tom Petty was from, because what he says is he's like, nowadays all of us have these magic phones that know everything, and you'll be in bed and a random question will pop in your head. We're sports people, so the same idea, right? We'll say, how many times did the Showtime Los Angeles Lakers sweep the finals? Answer, by the way, is 0. We'll get to that later. I can just look that up on my phone. And, as you learn certain websites better, as you learn the Boxscore Geeks better, as you learn Basketball Reference better, as you learn Wikipedia, as you learn what phrases to type into Google, we get better and better at being able to teach ourselves. So the fact of the matter is, Brian, you and I are from a generation where so many things are bizarre nowadays. And I just had a son that I've talked about a few times. And one of the things that is blowing my mind is this notion that my son, at least if the world doesn't go to hell with Trump and, we're in a Mad Max,
I shouldn't be laughing right now, but this is a serious issue.
In 10 years or whatever, he's going to grow up in a world where the concept of scarcity of something you like in terms of content is going to be foreign. And by that, what I mean is, when I was a kid, I remember middle school. I think it was middle school or very early high school. I got into the show Dragon Ball, which is a popular anime. And the reason I found out about this is that one of the local stations that played cartoons, that you used to wake up early on Saturday to watch cartoons because the only time there's a block. Now there's an entire station on cable devoted to them, and that station is obsolete. But what I was going to say is, I found out that at 6 a.m. they would play Dragon Ball episodes on like Channel 4. And so, I would have to wake myself up every weekend at 6 a.m. to catch this. And if I missed one, I would have to wait 20 weeks for it to play again. And then God forbid the station decide to change up the programming schedule. And then like that happened, like Dragon Ball Z disappeared from the airwaves for me. No. Nowadays, if my son gets into Dragon Ball with Netflix, with Hulu, with YouTube, with Amazon, I can get him like every episode that's ever existed for a trivial amount of money, if not free. And that is really messing with my head. And then the side effects, sorry, this is a really super duper long tangent. But the entire point of this is, the reason people have been getting better at taking tests and seem to be getting smarter is just the abilities, the ease of access to be able to learn things has gotten better and better. As I mentioned, the reason this was inspired by is that Jack O'Brien is leaving Cracked.com. He started it up 11 years ago. He's, the head honcho there now, or was the head honcho there now, and has left. And he started up the Cracked podcast, and the very first episode was on the Flynn effect. And then as his last episode, he kind of did like a victory lap where he talked to some of the various co-hosts he'd had on the Cracked podcast. It's still great. I still love it. I still love lots of the hosts. Jason Pargin is one of my favorite people to listen to. So as long as he's still there, Cracked podcast is still going to be one of the top listens on my podcast rotation. But they talked about the Flynn effect again. And then I thought about this because one of the things that happened is Magic Johnson came up and said he thought the Showtime Lakers would sweep the current Warriors. Now, for what it's worth, the current Warriors, according to the numbers, Brian, let me see if I got this right. They are the fourth best team all time. Are the only teams ahead of them, two 70s teams, the 71 Lakers, 72 Bucks, some variant of that, and then the 1996 Bulls. Am I mistaken on that?
Yeah, that's very close. We brought that up. Basketball References, all-time best SRS, basically. And I believe the Warriors were third or fourth, and those other teams were up there as well. So yeah,
and the reason I want to even bring that up.
Sorry, one more thing. This is their best season, better than the championship season or the 73 wins last year.
And so let's explain what we mean by that. So Basketball Reference has a formula called SRS. Probably overcomplicated. That's a lot of metrics. But the basic gist of it is you take the point margin, how much your team outscores their opponents on average by, and then you look at their strength of schedule. Basically, you look at all the teams and see how much they on average outscore their opponents by. And if you put those two together, you basically get the idea of how much would my team outscore an average opponent by for a normal game, or I think 100 possessions. And so the Warriors are what, like above 11 this season, and that's only happened 4 times if I recall.
Yeah, we're bringing this up right now, and they ended up. Oh, this is old. Okay, here we go. Current, or I should say, end of the season SRS. The 16-17 Warriors did end up at 11.35, and only 4 teams have ever done that. And the 3 being above them are 70-71 Milwaukee, 71-72 Lakers, and 95-96 Bulls. So yeah, you were correct.
And so the most perfect aspect of those 3 teams too is, as I've mentioned before, in the 1970s, the draft was different. The rules of the league were different. There's no 3-point line. Talent was way more. This is going to be a weird way of phrasing it. There was less talent in the NBA, and the NBA was smaller, and so those 2 things combined meant that super teams were much better. So, because I believe one of the Bucks teams that is the best ever, I think, had Kareem and Oscar Robertson, if I recall. And so, this really breaks down to, it was a much different league in that, if you were a super team back then, first, there was no free agency, let alone restricted free agency, which meant, in theory, if you got a great team together, this is why like the Celtics in the 60s just kept winning and winning and winning. You got a great team together, you could just keep that great team together unless you like had a problem with your star. And that's why like Kareem and Moses Malone got moved back in the day. Basically, they didn't get moved because they demanded it or Kevin Durant it. They got moved because their team decided to move them. And then the last point is, as I mentioned, 3-point line. The 1995-1996 Bulls had a shortened 3. And in fact, if you look at that Bulls team, this is one of the points we've made about Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan, I'm not going to dispute he's one of the greatest ever. He's easily Mount Rushmore in basketball's history. Probably, and the only thing that would kind of keep him maybe off my personal list of like top 3 if you're going to go all time is longevity. And that's because he gave up 2 years in his prime to play baseball. And then, retired a little early given the fact that we saw he could still play later. And, the other thing was he was not as good in that second three-peat as he was in the first one. And he had an edge, which was they shortened the 3-point line. He was good from 3 for the first time in his career, and that was because they shortened the 3-point line. So the current Warriors, with the current rules, the current playoff structure, the current restricted free agent, the current salary cap structure, there was no salary cap, right? It's entirely possible Michael Jordan wouldn't have gone back to the Bulls, or they wouldn't have been able to afford Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman with the current salary cap rules. The current Warriors are like the best team we have ever seen. And the teams before them, when we're trying to compare like apples to apples, we basically go, this is an apples to oranges scenario. So my basic point is this is the greatest team the NBA has ever seen, even better than last year's 73 win team. And the reason being, we're looking at how much they outscored their opponents by. And once you start getting to the margins, like Arturo's talked about it, if you assume a linear pattern of point margin to wins towards the edges, towards the very edges, which the Warriors are at, it starts to get a little wonky. And then, in fact, then you get into luck territory. The Warriors winning 73 games last season, I forget what I think their expected win total was like 67. So they won 6 close games. Like I think they won like all of their overtime games and a couple really close games. And that's why they got to 73. This last season, I think they underperformed marginally, which is to say there were a couple, of the like 5 close games they had or whatever, they only lost a couple. So this is the best team the NBA has ever seen. So Magic Johnson is full of crap. And there is one point I want to bring up. This is Arturo Galletti has brought up this idea before. And so I want to say this is not what we mean, but I want to put it on the table so at least it's out there. If you were to take the core players of the 1990s Bulls, that the 1995 through 1998 Bulls that got that three-peat, were and still, by the way, for what it's worth, that 3 years is going to be hard to top because the Warriors are still going to need to win back-to-back championships now to even match that. Even having these 2 years in a row, they've only got one title for 2 years thus far to show that we're not counting our chickens yet. If you were to take Michael Jordan, Dennis Rodman, Tony Kukoc, Steve Kerr, trying to think of anybody else. I said Dennis Rodman. I think maybe 1 or 2 other guys on that team. If you were to take them, find them at age 18 or maybe younger, bring them, transport them to the modern day, have them do modern training, modern coaching, modern conditioning, modern diet, all of the things modern teams have.
The rules are better for offense now too.
Well, I'm not. Let's leave
Okay, we'll
rules on.
leave that out.
But to that point, also train them in that because we'll get to the
Yes.
other question in a second. Train them in modern rules, modern coaching, modern conditioning, modern eating, modern health, modern medicine, right? Because it's a really simple question, right? Is Grant Hill, had ankle injuries that just basically sidelined him for his whole career, and he came back with the Suns and was decent, but was never near his peak Detroit era stats. Question is, in the modern day, have they improved? I have no idea, by the way. I'm not a surgeon at all. If have they improved ankle surgery such that maybe Grant Hill in a modern day is better? So
Oh,
anyway,
interesting.
that's what I'm saying. If you get modern medicine, training, coaching, etc., you get the core Bulls from that era, you get the core Warriors from this era, you get the same kind of average tail end players on the bench and have them play each other. Would that be a competitive series? Absolutely. Now, let's say you go and get a time machine and choose whatever era you want, right? Showtime Lakers, do you want the 1980-81 Lakers when Kareem's still an MVP and Magic's a rookie? Do you want them right after James Worthy joins? Do you want them after James Worthy's gotten a little bit better? Which Lakers do you want? But okay, you get a time machine, you get that Lakers. Let's say you give them a little time, you give them a couple months to beef up on modern rules and then have them play the Warriors. Do they beat the Warriors? No, the Warriors kick their ass. And this is the Flynn effect that we're talking about, where essentially every era gets to stand on the shoulders of the previous era. The great metaphor the Cracked podcast brought up is think of the Matrix. There's the wonderful
I
scene
was
in the
thinking
Matrix.
John Hammond actually in Jurassic Park, Dre. He talks
Okay,
about
so
standing on the shoulders of giants. But sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I'll finish mine. Then I want to hear you finish this because beyond that, just being the quote, I want to hear how this applies to Jurassic Park, and it's not ringing a bell. But so, in The Matrix, there's this great scene where he's like, do you know how to fly a helicopter? And she goes, not yet. And, then the operator clicks some buttons and she does now. And then, of course, the famous line, I know Kung Fu. Right. The idea that you could just have your brain plugged into a computer and boom, have all the knowledge given to you. Well, in reality, if you think about that, we have that ability currently with books and information, and we are just getting better and better and better at indexing that information, making that information more available, such that every generation is getting access to more and more information. In fact, one of the, we bring up Malcolm Gladwell all the time around here. In the book Outliers, he's called it the most bastardized thing he's ever written, but the 10,000 hour rule, he talks about how chess players, professional chess players that become grandmasters, all of them take at least 10,000 hours to reach that level of proficiency. And then he actually noted in follow-up speeches that time has actually gone down. And it makes sense because one person that actually broke that rule, the 10,000 hour rule for chess at the time of Malcolm Gladwell writing that book was Bobby Fischer. And a key part about Bobby Fischer is Bobby Fischer was in New York where all of the best chess players were. He befriended some of the best chess people who had some of the best chess book libraries ever. And so, one story I love about Bobby Fischer is he met this chess teacher who had a great book collection. The guy's like, hey, you're into chess. You're great. I'll tell you what, I'll give you any 3 books from my collection. And what he expected was Bobby Fischer to kind of just, gloss over and say, this one looks good, this one looks good, this one looks good. And what Bobby Fischer did is he actually took that as an invitation to say, I'm going to scan your entire library over the next couple of days and very meticulously decide what is the best book to keep, and then took those books. I don't know if it's 3, but and I don't even know if I'm getting the anecdote 100% correct. But, the point being Bobby Fischer's benefit was he was in the epicenter of where chess was happening with the greatest teachers near the greatest libraries. And that point also came up in Soccernomics, where there's a question of why isn't the United States better at soccer? One hypothesis that Steven Szymanski brings up in Soccernomics is, well, you want to have a network of good teams to play against. So if you look at Europe and South America, you have these great teams that are close to other great teams. They can train each other and trade good players back and forth and trade good coaches and all this stuff. And that, by the way, the United States is same is true for basketball, right? All of the best basketball minds, all of the best basketball trainers, all of that are in one area that are very close to each other, hop, skip, and a jump, harder for teams in Europe and stuff to get access to it. So the point being with the Flynn effect is we have just gotten better and better at collecting information and dispersing information. And that means that the next generation is a leg up, right? If my son isn't smarter than me by the time he goes to college, if we compare our relative intelligences of when we went to college, how much stuff we know, how good we are at knowing stuff, how good we are at looking stuff up, I will have failed as a parent because think of the advantage my son has compared to me. When I was a kid, my parents would regularly take me to the library. We lived a couple blocks away from a local branch of the library. The downtown Denver Public Library is amazing. It's a beautiful library. So many books. My parents would take me to bookstores and let me buy whatever books I wanted. That was one. I wasn't a great student, but one trick they did with me is basically they encouraged me to read my entire life. And so the easy way they did is I always, I wouldn't know if I could get money to like go to Six Flags, but I always knew I could get money for books. And so I read a ton. Well, my son is going to have access to, if I give my son a Kindle and buy like Amazon Prime, that's going to be access to a bigger library than I had access to in my entire life as a child. And so, sorry, bouncing around a ton, but yeah, just applying. It's impressive to apply that to basketball. And here's what I'm going to try and do, Brian, or try and walk you through. So what we're going to do is let's talk two of the most impressive players at a similar position. So Larry Bird, let's go to 1986. 1986 Larry Bird. So if you go to the players, if you go to the tools tab on Boxscore Geeks, and that's /players/compare, if you go boxscoregeeks.com, man, we really need to make this better. One of these days, I know I've said that forever. We didn't get game logs done this year either, Brian, so I lied to everybody. But okay, if you just open one tab with that and take a look at Larry Bird in 1986, something else that's going to pop up is the average guard forward, which is the position we say is. So if you look at Larry Bird in 1986, well, the average guard forward got like 7 rebounds, 5 assists, 3.3 turnovers, 4.6 fouls, and the bigger one, that I think the biggest thing that has changed in the NBA, if we're going to talk Flynn effect, is shooting efficiency. The average wing in 1986 had a true shooting efficiency of 53.8%. So now what I want you to do, Brian, is I want you, am I right in this? I think 2012 is probably LeBron James's best season in terms of his MVPs, if I recall.
Because he was on the Heat then, right?
That was his best year of the Heat. Obviously he still deserved. Oh, that is a terrible bug. Sorry. If you have like Larry Bird entered in your query, then you can't look up other seasons. So all I was trying to do is open a new tab.
I got retry later.
Oh, whatever. Okay, but so if you look up LeBron James in the 2012 season, what I believe you'll notice, and sorry, this is taking a while. I should have had these prep, but what are you going to do? Actually, the average guard forward went down in true shooting. So my theory might be wrong. But if you look at Larry Bird in that era, 58% true shooting, LeBron James 60.5% true shooting. And so if you're looking at the best players in the NBA, these guys are getting better and better. And then I think if you look at like the raw stats, actually, yeah, this is an interesting one. I'm going to have to definitely do this because I was going to make the claim that like the average player is getting better. I'm going to have to take a look at these more in depth because I do know, for instance, this season's shooting. I was looking at that. This season's shooting has just gotten better and better. And I'm actually shocked at that true shooting percentage. The simple reason being, if you look at historical data, if you look at what an average wing would do in 1985, 1986, the average three-point field goal percentage was 28.9%, and the average amount of three-pointers was 0.9. They would take 0.9 three-point field goal attempts per game. Now, in LeBron James's era, the average guard forward takes 5.3 three-pointers per 48 minutes and shoots at 35.4%. So the thing that must have swapped, by the way, on that thing is actually like defense. So both, it makes sense. Both are going up. But just if you look at like the skills of an average modern player compared to the skills of an average former player, it's just much different, right? If you could keep a team to 28% three-point percentage in a modern NBA, you would be considered a godly team. And that was the average for wings back in Larry Bird's day. So, it's just not, to me, it is not a question when you look at NBA teams from the past compared to NBA teams of the future. The idea that the NBA team from the past, if you just use like I would call it the time machine method, right? They would not stand a chance against the modern teams because of all the modern stuff that the new teams know. And a large part of that is, we have entire tape libraries from the 1980s that modern teams are allowed to look at. We have coaches that learn things. We have analytics geeks that looked at stuff that learned. So in theory, as long as people are doing it right, and this isn't always the case, right? There is definitely some stigma with expertise, and maybe there's a downhill trend on the Flynn effect. It hasn't happened yet, though, by the way. But as long as that's the case, newer trumps older, is my opinion.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that. And, I've been thinking, this is a little bit of a side topic, but one of the big criticisms this season has been, well, The Warriors' path toward the title has been a weak path. That the Cavs weren't very good, the Spurs weren't very good. None of these teams were very good.
Let's be clear, the Spurs without Kawhi, and I mean,
Exactly.
there is no way you're not a Spurs fan and don't hate this. So, by the way, Brian, some fun trivia. Do you know the biggest losses the Warriors sustained this last season?
Oh, definitely game one of the season to the Spurs was a huge beating.
I don't know if it was game one, but they got beat by 22 points by both the Spurs and the Nuggets. Haha. And so the Spurs actually had a better regular season record against the Warriors. They were 2-1. To be fair, the last game the Warriors played them, they beat them. And then,
Yeah.
of course, the Spurs were up by like 20 points in game one before Kawhi went down with injury. So it's easy to, of course, think, hey, maybe the Spurs had a chance. And, of course, they did. The Spurs were the second best team in the NBA. The Warriors were still significantly better than them. And by the way, let's not forget, one of the best teams of all time was the 2008 Boston Celtics. And they took the first round against the Atlanta Hawks to game 7. So I don't overreact. Like but the way to phrase it is, in the playoffs, yeah, things can happen. Last year's Warriors should not have lost to the Cavaliers, even with an injured Steph Curry. And, I had a friend that noted that I think, I forget who, it might have been CBS, Matt Moore. Someone was doing a bracket of title teams from the last 16 years and did like a bracket and said, which of these championship teams would beat all the others? And my friend noted that, if you put the 73 win Warriors in that, they would still probably be the favorites, despite the fact that they didn't win the title.
Yeah, that's right. So this is a tough question, right? You can't really compare SRS even across eras. I don't think an adjustment or anything would really help with that because, again, like we said, the rules are so different and the training is so different.
Well, we have an adjustment, and that's the important thing, and we've said this about stats a ton, is to note what you are telling and then note the constraints of the data. So, for instance, Dave Barry, he does the draft numbers every year, and every year we talk to him about it, and he basically says, look, these are not crystal ball calculations. These are not even guarantees because it's for most of the players that are going to be drafted highly, it's 1 year of data in college. And, for instance, one theory, this is just a thrown out there theory, not even saying it's real, is right. Andre Drummond. We didn't like his college numbers, thought he was a meth player. I know that Lane Vastrell liked him more than we did. I'm assuming that's because you look at things like position and height and age. But essentially, it's entirely possible Andre Drummond just didn't want to be in college. Ben Simmons had that issue, right? Where, he made a decision to go to a weaker school in terms of NCAA prospects, making the Final Four. And it was arguably blowing off classes, which, by the way, why wouldn't you blow? Like, if I knew I was going to be making millions of dollars in a couple months in college, I would have blown it off. I was personal thing for my own life. Like I got all the work done for my master's degree, except for writing up my thesis. And I was still debating quitting grad school without finishing. And, it was kind of you're so close. It's just a little bit of work, but I got a job at one point. It was like, maybe I'll just quit and go to the job instead. So, it's not that you can say definitively, oh, this is the reason, but it's just not a lot of data. And, also, if you look at the R squared and stuff that says how good the model is, that basically says over half of how well a player performs in the NBA is not defined by how well they did in college, which means there's tons of more than half of what ends up making a great NBA player is stuff we don't know at the time they are drafted. And so, it's very, very important whenever you say numbers, when you say models, to say the constraints. And so that's what we can say. When I say Magic Johnson is one of the greatest NBA players ever, what I mean is if you compare Magic Johnson's to his contemporaries in the era he was in with the rules he had to play with, he was amazing. Is it possible? No, I doubt it. But is it possible that in the modern NBA, the modern rules would be such that he wouldn't do well, or maybe the modern travel schedule, because there are more teams in Florida than there were before? I think, did they even have any? No, wouldn't have had any. They had no teams in Florida in Magic Johnson's time, right?
He was still around when the Heat and Magic came around, which I think was 91 or 89, something like that.
Really?
We'll have to double check. It was close.
At least during his prime when he was winning, because the last title he won.
Yeah, in the mid '80s. Yeah.
So I'm just saying, that's the point, right? If we say Magic Johnson's entire career has to travel to Florida 4 times a year or whatever, and that jet lag or whatever, though modern planes are also better too. So the same thing might be true, right? I just made the argument, modern. If you took people from the past and put them in the modern era, training, whatever. And I still, by the way, this is going to sound rough, even in inverse, right? If you took a modern team and sent them back in time, they would still crush them because, for instance, nobody's shooting threes in the 1980s, and the Warriors would just come, and not only would they be able to shoot threes, they would just be draining them at an insane rate that no one knows how to guard. They would still be winning.
Well, no, and that's a big point, right? When this shortened three-point line came around in 1995, and teams did improve a lot from three-point range, but you have to realize a lot of these players like weren't even practicing threes. They're like, what? We have to shoot threes all of a sudden? Like they didn't grow up with that being a thing. So, yeah, it wasn't easy for them.
But so, that's all we can say. And that is very important, right? We won't definitively be able to answer questions like, is Magic, it's hurting me, but I'm going to say it. Is Magic Johnson better than Kobe? Well, they played in different eras with different teammates against different competitions. So we can't even looking at their numbers, we can't even necessarily say who would be better in whose era. Now, the reason we can easily say Kobe isn't the greatest of all time, right, is in his own era, there are players, Kevin Garnett, Tim Duncan, LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, Manu Ginobili, players that are easily better than him that we can say, okay, in his own era, he doesn't stack up. And, we can say, but that's the funny thing about the Flynn effect, right? Is that it's entirely possible if you take star level Kobe Bryant from like 2004 and transport him back in time 20 years, does that make him superstar level? Who knows? Nothing. Okay,
that's all I got.
Well, yeah. So like I said, that's just kind of a shout out to the Cracked podcast. I keep forgetting shout outs. That used to be more of a regular thing. Now it's not as much. But shout out to Jack O'Brien, one of my favorite podcasters, content creators on the web. The Cracked website is one of my favorites. Everything he's done there has been amazing.
Does he have any new projects announced for you to hype up for us?
If you go to jackobrien.com, so he apparently left it for something else that I think is podcast related. I'm not sure what, and if it's any kind of podcast network, candidly, I'll say it on the show. I'm going to really bug and keep track of it because I'm really excited. Because like I said, I love him as a podcaster. So you can go to like jackobrien.com, and then he's got like a form that says like, if you're interested in keeping up to date on what I'm doing, enter your email. And I've already done that. So,
excellent.
But we don't know what he's doing yet. And then it's also possible, right? With how high up the level he was at, I think crack.com has been acquired several times by bigger media conglomerates. So I think at his level with him quitting, right, it's not as simple as just, if you work at Target, walking out the door and doing something else, they might have had some like non-compete for a certain amount of time or whatever. So who knows? But we will find out soon, I am sure.
That's true. We finally got Megyn Kelly unleashed on NBC. That non-compete ended.
All right. So the other thing we kind of want to talk, also old hat, is positionless basketball, which is, I've made the joke, if we had a Boxscore drinking game, that's obviously one whenever we bring up position. And Brian, I forgot to put it on the script, but actually there was some article called like Kevin Durant, the center of the finals or something. And there's just one quote in it that I want to use. But, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about the notion of positionless basketball, maybe some of the Ari Caroline floor stretch stuff from the past, and then kind of why we still don't really fall into the idea that there is such a thing as positionless basketball.
Yeah, so I've been struggling with this a little bit the last few days and chatting with you a little bit about it. So I'll start this off and you can kind of pick up the pieces from there. But no, it's basically, so here's what I've been having a lot of problems with is Coach LeBron or Coach Tyronn Lue, whoever you think the coach is there, just playing, not playing Tristan Thompson enough minutes, basically, right? He's getting about 20 minutes a game. I think he got, 21 in one and 19 the other.
If you didn't watch last week's show with Chris Ye, which was a fantastic show, you definitely need to check it out. Basically, what Brian said is he said he had a plan to beat the Warriors, which is an odd, you're like Batman, right? Like you keep plans to defeat, you keep plans to defeat your allies, which
sure, why not?
a weird thing, and then they're going to fall into enemy hands, and then your team's going to get defeated again, and it's going to be all your fault. But basically, you said they really had to take advantage of the boards. They had to crash the board. They had to really crush them on rebounds, and then kind of the same as last year when the Cavaliers won. They really needed the Warriors to shoot badly. They really needed Harrison Barnes, and then they needed to shoot really well. Don't forget LeBron James shot his best that he ever has in the finals, and so far not only has none of that happened. You mentioned I didn't even pay attention to last game. So last game, what was the rebound discrepancy went in the Warriors' favor, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah. So that part two you were talking about, just the kind of getting lucky part. Well, it's luck. You can't really control that as much by default. Just try to take good shots. Don't take bad ones, whatever. Well, that has not been going the Cavs' way. It didn't go their way in game 1. It didn't go their way in game 2. They're not shooting as well as the Warriors. And part of that probably is offense and defense. But the reason I point this out is because last year, Kyrie Irving went crazy shooting contested shots. He made all his contested shots. The Warriors, especially Harrison Barnes, Steph Curry a little as well, they missed all their open shots, right? Just bad luck. What can you do about that? Coach better, try to even increase your looks more, whatever. But this first part, the lineups part, that's very straightforward, right? You just say, hey, get into the game, Tristan Thompson, get us some rebounds. It's not like a big mystery. So they pretty much went with the same lineups as before in the first game. And so I remember going through this exercise with Chris last week, right? And I asked him the question, the Cavs beat the Warriors by 9 rebounds in the first game. Is that enough for this blueprint for them to win when they're such underdogs to work? Chris immediately said, no, it's not. And we pretty much agreed with him. And then look what's happened in game 2, though. Instead of winning by 9, they lost by 12, I want to say, or 11. So let's just say that went negative 21 rebounding from game 1 to game 2 for the Cavs. And, here's the thing about lineups that we've been trying to talk about, I've been trying to get through, is you give up opportunities when you don't play your best players. There's so many positive stats you want to try to build up and pile up for a game, and if you get enough of those and minimize that pile of negative stats, that's going to get you over the finish line and win you the game, right? So your best players are those players who are going to pile up the most stats in the different categories.
Okay, that's what I wanted when you said the different categories. So here's what I'm going to do. If you look up NBA Finals, Kevin Durant playing center, and then it's at the Ringer by Kevin. I'm just going to say Kevin because I can read his Twitter handle, and that's a bunch. I can't tell where the delineation is, but it's by Kevin, and we'll include it in the show notes. But he said Kevin Durant is the most skilled 7-footer in the history of basketball. Come on. You're going to do that to Kareem? Anyway. And now he's playing in an era where smaller, leaner players can play traditionally bigger roles. Now, this is a line that I disagree with, but I thought it was hilarious. That's because there are no positions anymore, only roles and responsibilities. Now, here's what I found funny about that, and I've got a metaphor. One of my first jobs, I worked at Target. And at Target, they don't call you an employee. They call you a team member. And I don't know if you've ever had a bank like this, right? Where at a bank, they don't call you a customer. They call you a guest. Now, here's the thing. If you were to ask Target to write out what a team member's responsibilities were, and you were to take that bank and ask them what the role they expected the guest, what a guest was allowed to do, what they couldn't do, what they get charged for, etc. Basically, if you looked at that, I could go and then you took away the title, right? You took away the title and just wrote out the bullet points. I could look at a Target team member set of description, like, oh yeah, that's an employee, or I could look at a bank's guest and go, oh yeah, that's a customer. And so the same thing here, where he says there aren't positions, but there are roles and responsibilities. Well, a position, and I mean traditionally in the NBA, that's all that's been. A position has been, here are your roles and responsibilities. And, for instance, the simple way we've broken it down on the site, and I do agree to a degree for some players, a very select few, by the way, which is why I'm not crying any tears just yet. Essentially, we've said there are point guards, and we've accepted this. Every team has a guy that just gets the ball to start the play. And then that player's job is to basically hold the ball or distribute the ball. And even if they're on a team, you can make the argument, for instance, that LeBron James is a point guard, right? I have no complaints with that. In a historical NBA, he might have been another Magic Johnson. However, there's still a point guard. Every team has this, a player that holds the ball primarily and then is supposed to pass it. Then we said wings, which are players that are supposed to basically stick around the perimeter, guard the perimeter. And then bigs, these are players that are supposed to get near the hoop. Okay. So let's say hypothetically, though, you're going to talk about playing small. And what you just said is buckets of responsibility, which is what I like, because we talked about roles. Now, you might say to
buckets might be a bad term because that is like scoring a bucket, like hoops. We're talking about buckets in the abstract sense, like counting.
The unfortunate part is any metaphor, bucket, basket, whatever, is going to sound just like
piles. Piles might be better.
But, for instance, this is one of the most popular things in basketball historically is Dean Oliver's four factors. And, which of the
Yes.
four factors do you win?
It's
And,
exactly what we're talking about. Yeah.
and so, by the way, here's what bugs me, by the way. If you're someone who loves Dean Oliver's four factors or win shares and then hates wins produced, you don't understand they're all built on the exact same math. But, to your point, if I have a player go out there and I'm going to play small, what I am essentially saying is I am going to give up some of my rebounding and post defense bucket in exchange for assumably perimeter defense and outside scoring. Fine. Well, the issue with that becomes then, diminishing returns, right? There's only one ball, so there's only so much I can do it. And the reason that the Warriors can play small where other teams cannot is that when the Warriors, quote unquote, play small, and by the way, they're playing small with Kevin Durant, who's a 7-footer, and Draymond Green. And Kevin Durant and Draymond Green at any era in the NBA could have played center. Same is true of LeBron James. I mean, don't forget, Magic Johnson in the 1980s finals played center. And just because he was a point guard doesn't mean he couldn't play center. And in fact, that's the key. For teams that are capable of playing small, the trick is they have players that can play at that bigger position. Now, I agree when we start getting into arguments about us saying a player's wins produced is this because they're a power forward, and you say, well, they're really more of a wing. What you really would have to ask is, okay, coach, when you put the player in the game, what things do you want them to do? And they might say, well, I want them to score like a wing, but rebound like a power forward and pass like a point guard, right? Fine. And that's a little harder to do. And I completely understand the reason a lot of people bristle at wins produced doing things like this to players like Dirk Nowitzki is them going, well, this player, if they were played they're really a small forward, right? And this was something that was kind of true in the opposite direction. Kevin Durant, when he was a rookie, was played as a shooting guard. And the same was actually true of LeBron James. LeBron James and Kevin Durant both started their careers as shooting guards.
Was LeBron even a point guard his rookie season?
I thought it was shooting guard from what I recall. I'll have to look. I don't recall ever seeing him being.
I feel like he did bounce around though a little bit position wise his first couple of seasons.
But if you're going to say this player is really more of an X and they're being played out of position, and as a result they would be better if they were played in another position, I can't disagree. And in fact, there are players, right, with great shooting efficiency. That's been one of our arguments about Kevin Love on the Warriors is that he doesn't get the ball and as many shots as he did when he was on Minnesota. And so he's being underutilized. But again, when we were talking about asking a stat, what it says in its constraints, when we look at stats like the wins produced, we are just telling you, given the position the player was put in, for the most part, right? I'm agreeing that we could probably improve our algorithm to some degree to handle some of the edge cases like Dirk Nowitzki playing next to Sean Marion, which I'm hoping to at some point. But, essentially we're just saying when you look at a player played at the position they were, how well did they do? And so the big issue when we talk about positionless basketball or small ball on the Warriors is they have players that are traditionally play a small position, like a small forward, right? Draymond Green and Kevin Durant, I believe, both started essentially as small forwards. And Draymond Green has basically ended up being a power forward center. And Kevin Durant, right, he's a small forward, but, at times with the Warriors, he's rolled out with a lineup where essentially he's going to take over some center responsibilities. If you have smaller players that can fill the buckets of those bigger positions, you're fine. But if you are like the Cavaliers, where you take out a center who is able to rebound and score from up close and replace them with Kyle Korver or J.R. Smith or who's the other guy? That's Deion Waiters. Well, all you have done is give up the positive stuff that your center would do and then do diminishing returns on a skill that arguably there are already better players on the team to do. And so that's why we always bristle against teams playing small out of a matter of playing small. You're really trying to maximize your buckets if you can, or blow, the one of my favorite teams of all time, the Detroit Pistons, the 2004. Essentially, they just said, what if we just overwhelm the defense bucket and the rebound bucket by such an amount that no team can keep up, even though our scoring isn't that great?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got this Ari Caroline Nash Equilibrium's article up right now, and I keep coming back to this over and over again, thinking about small ball, because I really like how you said diminishing returns there. Read this article for more detail, of course, but that's what happens, right? If you put 5 point guards on the floor at once, they're not all going to produce. Like, okay, let's talk more specifics here. So when I was a kid, I had the NBA Live console games, right? This was back in the early 90s when it was a couple of pixels.
Pre-2K days, man. Pre-2K.
Yeah, that's right. So this was what came out of like Magic versus Bird, type of games. But so This is the first game I remember where there was an NBA license with NBA players, and you could make custom teams. You could put whatever players you wanted on those teams. So, we loved doing that, right? So we would do games that was like, all right, your team is 5 Sean Bradleys against my 5 Dennis Rodmans. Like this is how we'd play. And these types of games can illustrate that, right? So let's say you've got 5 Chris Pauls on your team. They're not all going to play like Chris Paul, right? Because there's only one ball. And so he's guarding their point guard probably, and he's ridiculous at that. He's going to get a ton of steals, so he's got that opportunity. This is the one Chris Paul lineup we're talking about now. And then on offense, he's got the ball all to himself. He gets to pass. He's a great passer. He doesn't turn it over that much. He can shoot. Awesome, right? But let's say you've got 4 other Chris Pauls on the court. What are they going to do? They can't all guard the ball. They can't all shoot. They can't all pass. So you need some big guys, right? This is where the Nash equilibriums come in. And of course, the opposite is true as well. If you've got 5 Tristan Thompsons on the court,
since what's interesting about the team that you just brought up is all of them can shoot. So, for instance, you can stretch.
Sure.
But here's the thing: if you're a really good 3-point shooter in the NBA, right, it's like 40%. And assume the other team has some amount of defense, so maybe they knock you down a little. You're 38%. Well, guess what happens if you have 5 Chris Pauls that are all shooting from outside? You're not going to compete for rebounds with a traditional big.
Yeah, and that's right. And the Thompsons team has the same problem. So 1 or 2 of those Thompsons can sit under the basket like the real Thompson does, get rebounds, block shots, they're great. But then the Thompsons that are out on the perimeter, they're missing that opportunity, right? They're going to have to handle the ball or do other stuff that they're not very good at. So players that are good at doing those roles, even if you don't want to use positions, well, let's talk roles now. We'll go along in the archetype of this article. You have to have someone that's actually good at it. So if you add Richard Jefferson to this 5 Tristan Thompson team, and there's 4 of them and 1 Jefferson, yeah, you're going to make him handle the ball. He's a better outside shooter. He'd be an okay, valuable guy. But on a team with like LeBron James and a bunch of other guys that do that, we're back in the real world now. Richard Jefferson doesn't help you at all. Like you said, diminishing returns.
But what's interesting about the 5 of 1 player team, which I have always hated as a litmus test, right? Where people would go like, well,
it's the beginning of the conversation, right?
If you do the five Kobe Bryants against 5 Dennis Rodmans, who's win to prove that Kobe Bryant is better in a team sport than Dennis Rodman is in a team sport. I hate that. Now, here's the thing. You could do a team of 5 LeBron James. You could do a team of 5 Magic Johnsons. You could do a team of 5 Larry Birds. I don't quite know enough, but his skills are pretty versatile. You could maybe do a team of 5 Kevin Garnetts. There are players that probably 5 Draymond Greens too. You could do a team of 5 of an individual player, but the very simple fact about these players is they are, I've mentioned this before, like they're like unicorns, right? The reason I hate it when people go, they should play small like the Warriors, you go, the Warriors have Draymond Green who can play 4 positions. The Warriors have Raymond Green and Kevin Durant now, right? The Heat back in the day with LeBron James, that you go, they're playing small because Chris Bosh is out. They're not playing small. LeBron James can play center, but LeBron James is one of the few players in the league that has the ball handling skills to be a point guard and the big skills and body type and height and wingspan and all that stuff to be a center. And so that's what's always bugged me too about this idea of that as a strategy. It's, a strategy that I hate in any sport is you go, step 1, assume that you get 4 of the most unique players in Major League Baseball. It'd be like, I don't baseball strategy that well, but I assume the correct strategy with a power hitter like Stanton is you're supposed to bat them 4th or 5th.
Let's start out with 4 Mike Trouts in the middle of the order. How about that, Trey?
Yeah, so I go, my strategy is to bat Mike Trout leadoff, which is probably not by the way, he can steal bases, he's pretty fast, probably not a bad idea.
9 Mike Trouts, he could pitch.
Yeah.
Probably.
But if I said, okay, I think it's a good idea to start Mike Trout leadoff instead of 4th. Again, I don't know the analysis. It might turn out that sabermetrics said that's the right move. Well, if that assumption requires me having 4 Mike Trouts, that's a stupid assumption. I mean, when the New York Yankees had Roger Maris and Mickey Mantle, and it was a big kerfluffle that Mickey Mantle got dropped to 5th in the order instead of 4th. It's like, well, you've got 2 of the greatest home run hitters in the league together. You're allowed to do that. So, that's what always bugs me is that when people bring up these as strategies, as if they're some kind of clever strategy and then point to teams where they succeed, it's like you were pointing it, and this is any team, right?
Let's take that even farther, though. Okay, let's say, so the all LeBron's team or the all Draymond Green's team, yeah, those would be really good teams. Well, let's just say 5 on the court at once. But if I say added one Chris Paul to go with 5 LeBrons, or with 4 LeBrons, or one Tristan Thompson to go with 4 LeBrons, I think those would be better than the 5 LeBrons, right? Adding that specialized guy would help.
And so the fun, and here's what makes like LeBron James just freaking nuts, is that, of course, if you look at LeBron James compared to some centers like Giannis, or not Giannis, Rudy Gobert, obviously Dwight Howard, various other centers, you can say, well, they're better than he is. But there are centers that are above average centers that you could look at LeBron James's stats and their stats and go, pass. But to your point, yes, if you took LeBron James with his pretty well-rounded skill set and then found a player that was better at certain skills in a given position and put them together, and then, by the way, you could end up, we love Tristan Thompson, right? But here, let's see, I'm trying to think of 2 players. So could you help me out? I'm going to say Rudy Gobert is one for sure.
Oh, better bigs? Or?
I'm trying to, not even a better big. I'm trying to say, let's say you had a team
bigs.
I'm trying to say you have a team with LeBron James, Rudy Gobert. I want to say healthy Noah, but Noah's not healthy.
What kind of player is this Noah player?
Jordan. Okay, actually, that's perfect. Let's have LeBron James on a team with DeAndre Jordan and Rudy Gobert.
Sure.
And I trade you Tristan Thompson. You could look at me and go, he's great. And you might even argue he's better than either of those guys. He's not, but you could make that argument. And you go, I don't need him. And in fact, this is the argument we've made about Klay Thompson on the Warriors. Klay Thompson, the more players you get that can shoot on that team, the less valuable Klay Thompson becomes because he's really only above average at one skill. You could maybe argue his defense, which is probably locked down. Although, by the way, just a note there, I do still subscribe to. I'm not saying Klay Thompson is a bad defender. In fact, I completely agree that he's a good defender. I am just saying you have to compare him to the fact that he's on a good defensive team, because we've seen good defensive players do nothing on bad defensive teams, or assumably good defensive players. Who knows? Maybe they're bad at defense.
No, and that's right. And let's be clear again. Like, I think this national equilibrium stuff is, it is important and it is something to consider. But really, if we're going back to real life now and not these 5 Sean Bradley teams, although I'd love to see that. If you're the Cavs right now, if you're Coach LeBron, just play your best players, right? And Tristan Thompson's easily one of your best players. Easily. He's going to pile you up the most stuff compared to those other players.
Is it like, the he's man of Ginobili point? The only counter is, we've had these kind of weird situations before where a player is not as good as their backup. Let's even do Carmelo Anthony, who we've thought is an above average player for a lot of his career. Remember during Linsanity, Carmelo Anthony wasn't playing and Jeremy Lin was doing nuts. It's kind of like there are times where you take a player out of the rotation because there are players that do the same things they do better. And, that's more than fine. But to your point, when the one place that the Warriors are vulnerable is rebounding, and you have one of the best rebounding weapons in the NBA and you're not playing them, you're not supposed to win this series. So I completely understand the getting scared and trying to, just do anything to try and win because you're not supposed to win. But, we always talk about gambling and poker backgrounds, et cetera. You really just need to take the strategy that gives you the best shot at success. And in this case, even if you lose 4-0, just accept that you are not supposed to win. And what makes this more annoying to us is that the Cavaliers are not doing that strategy and still losing.
It's such a great point because basketball, unlike a lot of things, is a zero-sum game. So you're directly competing for those rebounds, right? So if the Warriors have short guys in the lineup, Tristan Thompson can just come in and take those all away, maybe at a better rate than he would if he was against big men. So, yeah, the competition part of that matters.
All right, well, I've said everything I wanted to about the Flynn effect and positionless basketball, and we're close to an hour. I forget how long we did for the pre-show. So is there anything else you want to say about the NBA Finals? Do you want to change your prediction? Last podcast you said you said in 5. And I actually used the Boxscore Geeks accounts to give you a little crap about that because I said in 4.
I forget saying that, but I think that's a good prediction. I'll stick to it.
You think LeBron James steals at least one game.
Remember, the series doesn't start until the home team gets their first loss, Dre. That hasn't happened yet.
I'm just going to say, the reason my traditional refrain when looking at the finals is LeBron James can always steal you one, but LeBron James is playing great. And if LeBron James is playing great and you're getting smoked, I think it's over. And the last point, I'm still not going to overreact to this finals being lopsided. Let's be fair. the best competition for this team, right? The Warriors didn't have to play the Spurs, and I've stressed this before. I am not using this as an excuse to take away their title because the playoffs have never been about finding the best team. They traditionally find one of the best teams in the NBA, but there are all sorts of injury, other concerns that stop that, right? And so I'm just saying, when people are like, the Warriors haven't been tested, there have been times in the NBA, right? The Dallas Mavericks and San Antonio Spurs for years had a situation where, the way seeding used to work, it was, you'd get the top seed if you won the division. And even if your record was good, you would, the next seed would go to that. And so there were a couple of years, if I recall, if I'm not misremembering, Brian, let me know, where, one of the Warriors or Spurs would go home earlier than they should have because they were in a worse seed than they should have been. And, arguably, had you just done seeding by a straight strength of schedule to each conference, and even more accurately, seeding by a straight strength NBA wide, right? If with a 16 team of the NBA, one plays 16, two plays 15, instead of one plays 8 in the conference, there are some teams that were able to avoid the Spurs or the Mavericks en route to a title. And then, the team that came out of the East and or West that year was weaker than a team they had to go through. We've seen that happen in NBA history. So
it happens all the time. In fact, this is the first time the Warriors have had to beat the Spurs during their recent title run.
And arguably they didn't. And so
arguably they didn't.
But I'm just saying you can't really, I can completely buy using that as not an excuse. What I'm going to say is you can use that as a reason to be like, next season, don't be as scared, because especially if the Spurs do anything, right? This is kind of a mean thing. We were just talking about this, right? Where I think Tony Parker, the numbers say, is like an average to above average player, but he's older. He's getting beat up. He's not what he once was. And that team has, like, I think what Jonathan Simmons and how am I forgetting the Australian?
Patty Mills.
Or Patty Mills.
Yeah.
Patrick Beverly. Thanks.
They have another good young guard too, whose name I'm forgetting, but he played a lot of minutes in the final or the conference finals after Tony Parker went down.
Yes. So they have some younger, arguably better point guards that should be getting minutes. And then also now that money that they might have paid Tony Parker next season, they can do a stretch provision. That might actually jumpstart them into getting their team back into shape.
Hope it's not Chris Paul. That's scary.
I mean, if it is Chris Paul, yeah, that certainly helps them next year in the play. And I mean, that would be amusing as hell to me, right? If the Spurs get Chris Paul, the Warriors fall to the Spurs next season. I mean, it wouldn't take much, right? I mean, this team is amazing. What I've said about it is ludicrous to assume. Now, it could happen, right? It happened with the Bulls. The Bulls from 1995 to 1998 stayed tremendously healthy, avoided the age curve, right? That was an old team. If you recall, Michael Jordan, Dennis Rodman, and Scottie Pippen were all in their 30s and still played elite level, which is ridiculous. So I'm not saying it can't happen, but I'm saying we have seen too many great teams fall prey to owners getting mad about something, right? Let's say I don't even know the Lacob.
Yeah, Lacob. Yep.
Lacob. Okay, if Lacob decides that with the new stadium that he buys in San Francisco, that it's too much money and ends up trading Draymond Green early, or Draymond Green gets in a fight with the coaching staff, or Kevin Durant gets an injury that a Grant.
Yeah, no, that's a really likely scenario, Dre. If let's say the Spurs sign Chris Paul and then they square off against the Warriors in the playoffs next year, and either Curry or Durant are hurt, Spurs are probably the favorite in that series.
Yeah, so I'm just saying, don't overreact to this one. And what always bugs me when people freak out about things is I go, if you are a fan of NBA history, which most fans aren't, then you shouldn't be surprised by this. And you've seen this before, and you shouldn't overreact. But of course, that's part of the fun of being a sports fan, is overreacting. So anyway, that is all I got. I think that's been a good show, Brian. So I'll let you get the last word, and then I'll head us out.
Yeah, no, that's all I got. I mean, when Iceman, asked us, do the Warriors deserve an asterisk for these dirty plays and drink Kawhi and all that? I looked a lot into this kind of stuff, and that's the conclusion I came to. Every season is an asterisk. That's how I'd sum up what you just said.
Every season as an asterisk is actually a better title, in my opinion, like the Flynn effect. So
yeah.
Interesting. All right. Well, anyway, if you caught us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. We've been the Boxscore Geeks Show. You can find us on iTunes and Stitcher. Download, subscribe, upvote, helps us out. We go live every week at twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers. I'm going to announce something that I'm going to try and start doing. I'm hoping that I'm going to at least get something out every Monday And on that Monday article, I'm going to announce when we go live because I know our schedule's been all over the place. And candidly, myself, Brian, and Patrick just have too variable of schedule to guarantee a regularly scheduled time every week, other than being in the evening, usually sometimes Tuesday through Thursday. So I'm going to try and start on Mondays announcing when we intend to record the show. So if you want to watch it live, hop into the twitch.tv/nerd numbers chat room and ask questions whenever we can. So twitch.tv/nerd numbers. Like I said, bug me if you don't see any announcement on boxscoregeeks.com about when the upcoming show is going live. And then if you missed the live show and want to see all the great work Brian puts into finding links, videos, etc., go to channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. I've been your host, Dre Alvarez, aka Nerd Numbers, produced as always by Brian Foster, aka Boxscore Brian. We'll see you next time.